Hello, and welcome to the third training of the 2023-2024 school year on developing trauma-sensitive classrooms. This training kicks off our third session of our four-part professional development series. During this training, we will present several evidence-based practices on how to create trauma-sensitive classrooms, from which you can select the most relevant and apply them to your school. Please note that this training is not a comprehensive overview of all evidence-based practices on supporting students who have experienced trauma. After the training, we hope you will begin to implement these strategies and receive support from the school trauma team in doing so. REL Appalachia staff will help the school trauma teams support your implementation with a focus on adapting strategies to meet the needs of your school's context. So as we move forward into the training, the training will include follow-up coaching that's focused on building capacity to create trauma-sensitive school environments and classrooms, building off the work we did in the first and second sessions. We'll discuss three major categories of evidence-based classroom practices that can minimize the activation, or it's sometimes called triggering, of students' trauma responses, including the creation of emotionally and physically safe learning environments, the use of positive behavior supports, and social emotional learning strategies, and access to appropriate accommodations and services to support students' strengths and needs. When delivered with care and attention to students and families' racial and cultural experiences, these strategies can support all students, not only those impacted by trauma. Throughout this presentation, when you see this icon, we will ask you to pause the recording and reflect on the questions in your handout. We will point you to specific questions in the handout that are most relevant to the information presented on the slide. And I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Victoria.
Thank you, Mariana, and hi, everybody. Good to see you again. So now we're going to turn to three major categories of evidence-based strategies to create trauma-sensitive classrooms. In this section, we'll talk about what teachers can do day in and day out in their own classrooms to support students. Research shows that the most powerful intervention for students affected by trauma is a safe, caring, and consistent adult who can buffer the experiences of traumatic stress and support healing and resilience. Many students who have experienced trauma view the world as a dangerous place. Their fear, whether real or imagined, can activate the central nervous system, prompting fight, flight, or freeze survival responses. Many of you have probably heard of fight, flight, or freeze. These automatic survival responses reduce a student or anyone's ability to problem solve, think rationally, remain attentive, and self-regulate their emotions or behaviors. So teachers can help students feel safe by using strategies like those you see on screen. Let's start with the first one, promoting physical and emotional safety. To do this, create spaces for students to practice self-regulation. Think about a calming corner and sensory breaks. And then have a classroom filled with respect that recognizes diversity. The second strategy is create consistent schedules and predictable routines. To do this, try to minimize the number of transitions throughout the day and alert students in advance about any upcoming changes in the schedule, or if you're going to be doing something out of the ordinary, such as practicing a safety drill. The third is working to reduce trauma response reactions that happen in the classroom. So you can do this by staying alert for a fight, which might manifest as yelling, screaming, cursing, arguing, aggression, anger, all those kinds of things that you're familiar with, or flight, running away, refusing to participate, hiding, covering up, or freeze, where we might see students exhibit symptoms of withdrawal or daydreaming. They might be sluggish or sleepy. They might be apathetic. So these are the kinds of behaviors that you're looking for that students would show if they're in a fight, flight, or freeze situation. Talk with parents and caregivers when you can to identify behavior patterns and effective strategies to respond to such student triggers. To prevent these reactions, consider including sketching and relaxing exercises at predictable times every day, and even turn to something like music in the classroom, particularly rhythmic music such as drumming. Provide choice. That's our next strategy. Providing choice to increase students' sense of self-control and agency. Consider doing a check-in at the start of each class or day. You might ask people, what do you remember from yesterday? What would you like to be the same today? What would you like to be different? Then solicit the ideas and choices from the students. And when you do that and act upon it, it increases their sense of agency and their self-control. Discuss past and future activities that will help students activate their memories, and then that familiarizes them to future activities to build confidence and self-regulation. We've included reflection questions about how to create a safe, predictable, and transparent classroom on page 1 of the reflection questions handout. So we'll pause now and let you turn and look at that handout. Be right back. Okay, so social support and strong relationships are crucial for mitigating the negative effects of trauma. You can help students develop these competencies by using PBIS. We talk about positive behavior intervention and supports and social emotional learning strategies. These evidence-based practices foster student emotional regulation and build strong teacher-student peer relationships, reducing the likelihood that behaviors are going to escalate into problems. Strategies for PBIS and SEL include things like you see on screen that we'll review together right now. Set up universal classroom behavioral expectations and promote positive classroom climate. You can do this by involving students in helping to develop classroom rules. Tips are keeping the rules simple, keep them short, and then have them visible prominently in the classroom. Share classroom expectations with families and caregivers so that more than the students know what's expected. Establish morning meetings, or what you might call classroom community building circles. And within these, be sensitive and respectful to issues of cultural, historical, trauma, and identity so that students feel respect and can develop and maintain a sense of belonging. The second thing you can do is use short, clear, and sequenced instructions that are repeated periodically as the task is being undertaken. By doing this, you're going to support students whose memory systems are under stress and aren't functioning at their top capacity. Implement evidence-based behavioral interventions to support student behavioral success in the classroom with progress monitoring is our third strategy. When you do that, you can provide a range of ways to reinforce behavioral expectations. Think about visual, auditory, sensory prompts. Use words and pictures. Be sure to set clear, firm limits for inappropriate behavior, and then develop logical consequences, not punitive. Remember, we discussed this in a prior training. And then finally, explore using stress management, conflict negotiation, and de-escalation strategies to diffuse tense situations and to help students process feelings in the moment. We've included reflection questions on how to use positive behavior supports and social emotional learning in the reflection questions handout. And you might pause now and go and look at those before coming back to continue. Now I'm going to turn to my colleague, Hannah, for our next set of strategies.
Thank you, Victoria. Our third collection of evidence-based practices centers around understanding and accommodating students' strengths and needs, building off the information we shared in our last session. When students are served through multi-tiered systems of support, they receive services at the appropriate level of intensity at the right time. Here we have three strategies around this collection of evidence-based practices. First, discuss and assess students' needs, strengths, and difficulties with family members when possible, other teachers, and other professionals with whom they are familiar to promote student success. Be familiar with your school's screening processes like Terrace metrics, and learn all that you can about academic and behavior accommodations and supports that may increase students' ability to perform and achieve. Second, be well informed about the screening, assessment, and referral procedures and resources available through the school district and community in case students and their families need additional support, accommodations, mental health assessments or services, or other resources. For example, be knowledgeable about community resources that can support a student and their family with trauma needs related to food security, safe and secure housing, domestic violence services, legal aid, substance abuse services, faith-based supports, and mental health assessments. Third, make individualized modifications to academic work until the trauma has been sufficiently addressed. This may include accommodations in a 504 plan. You could, for example, modify, shorten, or give extended time for assignments, offer individual tutoring or support, assist the student with organizing, prioritizing, and remembering assignments. Allow students to bring something to class that provides comfort or aids focus, such as a memento or a fidget toy. Help the student to identify effective soothing techniques such as drawing, breathing exercises, and exercising that can be utilized in school to manage emotions. Allow the student to leave class to go see a school-based mental health professional if they're struggling emotionally. Create clear, concrete, and tailored behavior support safety plans for specific students that include identifying a contact person and designating a space to go if trauma responses are activated during the day. We've included some reflection questions about how to promote awareness of students' needs and referral resources in the reflection questions handout. You may want to pause the recording now to consider them. As one of our final suggestions, we'd like to reflect on how teachers can implement all these evidence-based practices with the principle of elevating cultural, historical, and identity issues in the classroom. Cultural, historical, and identity issues refer to schools moving past stereotypes and biases, recognizing historical trauma and implementing policies, processes, and protocols that are responsive to the cultural, racial, and ethnic and identity intersectionality needs of the individual served. In our first training, we discussed historical intergenerational trauma, such as poverty, abuse, and institutions like slavery and oppressions of Indigenous peoples. And the impacts of this shared collective trauma, which includes family and community conflict and mistrust, loss of traditional values, socioeconomic disadvantages, mental and physical health difficulties, and early mortality. How can you build awareness around these types of trauma and set up your own classrooms to create safe, secure, and supportive environments for all students to mitigate its impact? Here we list two strategies. First, celebrating diversity and individuality does not mean washing out or ignoring differences. Think about how you celebrate differences without making children feel different. Think about the materials in your room. Are they inclusive? Do a cultural, historical, gender inventory of your materials and compare it to the individual children in your classroom. Safe classrooms include an appreciation, respect, and recognition of diversity. Increase people's awareness about whether the classroom is where some students see themselves versus some students don't. Second, being respectful in interactions with families from all types of diverse backgrounds means that we increase our awareness about whether the classroom is a place where some students see themselves reflected in the surrounding and content and others do not. Consider how and how often you interact with families. Are they meaningful partners in your classroom? How can you learn more about your students' families and their priorities? Having this understanding builds a foundation of trust and rapport. Key to these strategies involves reflecting on your own biases and how they may affect the experiences for your own students. We've included some reflection questions about how to consider the impact of these cultural, historical, and identity issues in the reflection questions handout. You may want to pause the recording now to consider. I will now turn it over to Mariana to talk about how to avoid retraumatization.
Thank you, Hannah. We'd like to end this training with a very special and important emphasis on the importance of trying to avoid unintentionally introducing retraumatization into the classroom to the extent that that's possible. As a reminder, trauma responses are usually activated by reminders of past traumatic experiences that automatically cause the body to react as if the traumatic event is happening again in that moment. And in that moment, students can feel very unsafe and their behavior may be difficult to understand. And very often it is done without intention to cause harm. Examples of potentially re-traumatizing events include harsh or shaming discipline, loud noises, chaotic environments, physical touch, and unclear expectations or changes in routine. In response to these types of events, students can respond in these ways. They can break down, they can yell, they can scream and cry. They can show verbal or physical aggression. Their behavior can become very defiant, refusing to follow rules, or they can withdraw, refusing to speak and avoiding contact with others. So what should we do? In classrooms, teachers can be mindful of their students' potential trauma response activators and make an effort to minimize them. Some may be very specific to the student, and others may be very readily evident. If a child is re-experiencing a trauma, respond in a calm, solution-oriented way. Discipline is an arena that can quickly lead to re-traumatization if we're not careful. We never want to punish a child for not using tools that they have yet to acquire. And we don't want to disempower them by leading them to think that they have no self-control. Some children simply find it challenging to become calm or to regulate their emotions when they're distressed. Consider examining your current disciplinary practices and policies to ensure they are not overly punitive or restrictive. There should be fair, clear, and logical consequences to inappropriate behavior. You might also consider implementing restorative practices at your school, which have been found to reduce exclusionary discipline and narrow the racial disparities in how discipline is meted out in schools. Using restorative practices can also teach children what to do in situations so that they can respond more appropriately and effectively in future stressful situations. So let's take a look at where we're going to go next. What are our next steps? We hope you found the presentation to be useful. And if you have any questions, we hope you'll reach out and ask. The next step in the series is for you to implement some of these strategies that were introduced in the video. As you implement these strategies, your school trauma teams will help you consider your specific school's context. We expect you will have a few meetings with your school trauma team following the training to discuss how implementation of these strategies is working. You will receive one or more trainings by the end of the year following this same model. By the end of the year, you'll have been introduced to concrete practices across multiple trauma-related topics. Again, we hope you have found this presentation to be useful. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to your school trauma teams for support. Thank you.